We're going to get started. Just for your information, we are recording the first 30 minutes, and it will be archived on a page I will have of Lance's work. We have refreshments down here. This is a very casual day. If you don't know, restrooms are right around the corner on this floor. I'm Mary Wiseman, the Director of Instructional Innovation and Faculty Investment, AI Wrangler, and I have brought on an old friend.
You've been wrangled.
A fellow Wrangler.
Yep.
And we're just here to explore tools and hope that you can each go away having learned a little bit more, knowing about the perimeters of AI and the security constraints that we might have on campus, and then also to be able to be more productive and more of a critical thinker here on campus, and then be able to help our students. As an equity issue, it's very important, I feel, that we train our students to be critically thinking about the technical tools, and especially AI, and how to use it, and how to, respect it. So with no further ado, I will let Lance introduce himself. And again, please feel free to ask questions. We are recording, so I might bring a mic over so we can get it on the recording. If you don't want something recorded, just let us know. Any questions overall? All right, Lance.
And folks hear me good? Yes?
Yes.
How are we doing today?
Good.
Oh, come on, I know.
Yep.
I know it's rainy, let's bring a little energy, baby. Okay, super excited to be here. What Mary put out there is, a very tall order, and hopefully we will hit most of that in the ways that are helpful to folks here. And if not, there's always more conversation, and some of the things that we'll be doing today are really getting you to play around with, think about, and use some of these tools in the context of teaching and learning, but also in, as we all have all that other administrative work and stuff, and how do we think about using these tools in that context. So this is kind of the outline for today. We have, I'm gonna move this so it's not right in my face. So I'm gonna talk a little bit, and it's gonna be a little more interactive than just me up here for a half hour, but a little back and forth around things about generative AI. We're gonna actually explore, we're gonna do like an hour workshop around playing around with how we might use this in teaching and learning contexts. We'll do another workshop that's around using it in administrative contexts. And then the goal for today is actually gonna be you trying to figure out what's your use case and how do you further develop it out. And then within that, we'll do some peer reviewing. In other words, as you get it built out, sharing it with somebody else to get feedback. And then we're actually going to collect these at the end so that as a community, you can start collecting, here's a robust library of different ways with different prompts in ideas around approaching it. So that's the goal for today. Hopefully we'll make it there. I'm going to start with this quote from a colleague of mine, Laura Duman. She also has been doing a lot of work in AI over the last 16 months. And it's a much longer quote, but the thing that stuck with me is the train will always return, and there's still time to catch the next one. There's a lot going on with AI. I don't know about anybody else, but every time I try to start to delve into it, I feel like I just got punched in the face by a bunch of different, a whole train of folks, right? There's a lot going on. It feels like if you're paying attention, and even if you're not paying attention, it's changing every 10 minutes. What I really like about what Lauren's pointing out here is, first of all, wherever you are in figuring this out, there's lots of places to go. There's lots of trains to catch. There's lots of ways to kind of start to get caught up or get to a place where you're comfortable. Along those lines, you do not have to be at all the destinations, and you don't have to be at all the destinations at once. There is a lot. Nobody is good. Internally, we may feel like I need to know everything. Realistically, none of us are going to know everything. And so kind of giving up that a little bit and just recognizing I will, with others, find our ways through this. But I'd like to start off with, just a little brevity, just a little fun here. So I would love to hear from folks. What is generative AI? But let's do wrong answers only. So what do we got? What is generative AI? Skynet. All right, we're on the road to Terminator. Excellent. Oh, what was it?
I thought I knew you.
I heard Johnny 5 over here, a little assemble, disassemble. I got that. Trustworthy, yes, definitely trustworthy. In fact, I put in my social security number to it earlier today. I wanted to spell out a name. I'm sure it's fine. Others.
A living, breathing organism.
Living, breathing organism. Not yet, hopefully.
Neutral and objective.
Neutral and objective, for sure. That's where I go to get all of my, fair and balanced news, for sure. Any other takers? Wrong answer. Yep.
It will guarantee me an A.
It will guarantee me an A. Gosh, I hope so. I've been using it a lot. That's the only way. Any other takers? Wrong answers only. Going once.
It was the old Twilight Zone. There was a big computer called Agnes.
Agnes, the computer from the Twilight Zone. I love that throwback reference. All right, cool. I like to do that, just kind of lighten it up a little bit, recognize there's a lot of stuff about it that A, isn't perfect, B, is definitely not the things that we keep hearing that it can do or promise that it will do. And just know that this is a lot to figure out, so let's have a little fun with it. So I'm also curious from folks, I'm gonna call out the names of a bunch of different AIs, right? Because there's a lot out there. And I'm just curious of which ones folks have heard of. ChatGPT, raise your hands if you've heard of that. Right, pretty much everybody, cool. What about Claude? Okay, getting a few diminishing returns there. Bing / Copilot. All right, more Gemini / Bard. And if you're like, wait, why are they slashed? Because sometimes Bard is Gemini and sometimes Gemini is Bard. What about Barnabas? Got one in there, all right. What about Perplexity? Okay, we got a couple of Perplexity folks, or perplexed folks as well. And what about Write-Sonic? Right. So one of the things we're also navigating is there is an abundance of generative AI tools out there. In fact, there's so many generative AI tools and they all sound realistic or they could be legit, that I snuck a fake one in there. There is no Barnabas, I made that up. Right, so there's just a lot going on. There's things that are clear that aren't clear, then there's tools that didn't have it that do have it, right? Because if you have Grammarly, that now has it. Sometimes you're in your Google accounts and all of a sudden this magic wand shows up and you're like, okay, now what do I do? Even Google Slides now, you can use generative AI imaging. So, the thing for us to kind of think about is just there's gonna be a lot. And sifting through it is gonna be a challenge, right? This is something you'll hear me say time and again, and where I come back to is this is where communities of practice are really important. This is where conversations are really important. Because if I've done anything in the last 16 months around this, it's been not learn this on my own, but learn it in community with others, because there's gonna be things we see, we do, we figure out differently. In fact, the whole way I really got into this was back in January 2023 when this all emerged. I went to my provost and I was just like, we have a problem. There's this new tool that's out there and it's gonna really have an impact on education. I have an idea, it might be a little crazy, but you wanna go for a ride with me? And so I pitched to him, I was like, I think we should teach a course on generative AI in education, and with the students actually learn about it, play with it, figure it out. And he was like, sure, go for it. And figure out our usage policy for our institution. So for me, one of the most powerful things I did was actually learn with students in real time about what does and doesn't make sense around this tool. And so over the course, we learned about it, played with it, and this is in the first 4 months of this tool coming out. And every day, it was a different thing. And so as we were learning, we were like, well, what does this make sense for educational context? And by the end of that first course, we came up with a policy, a usage policy for faculty and students. When we moved to session 2 and taught it again, we actually test piloted it. We were just like, all right, let's see how this works. Let's see if we can, kick the tires. And so students took that policy and they used it to guide them in how they use AI in assignments in their different courses. We let those faculty members know. We didn't just do it under the radar, but they did it. And they found, oh, here's some tweaks, here's some things we want to do. When we finished that policy, we gave it to faculty to give feedback on. faculty were overwhelmingly positive. They weren't like, this is horrible. They had some good critical concerns in making sure that there was parity in the policy and that like if A is expected of students, it should be of faculty and vice versa. And then most recently we ran it through our faculty curricular committee and it's been instituted as our institutional policy. And so for me, that learning with students, there are things they brought up about how they're thinking about using it I wouldn't have thought of. And they had really good questions. Like they were looking not just to whether to use it or not, but like where are the guides, like where's the hard nose and where's the like, let's have a conversation about that. Okay, so,
Larry,
yep.
I just got a basic question. AI is an application software?
By and large, yes. So the question is, AI is an application software?
Right.
Yes.
It's not combined OS and operating system and
It is correct. It is not combined with an operating system at this time, although Microsoft has been looking to put it more into it as part of a software suite that it has around Windows.
Well, when I'm familiar with it, application software usually gets sold because it does a specific task or task, and there's also a profit motive that companies sell.
Yes.
And it's like, I'm trying to figure out, okay, they're developing this application software to be sold to,
Yep.
Go ahead.
So the question is, typically softwares get developed to be sold, and where does that fall within this? What I would say is it is bringing in a lot of revenue because there are paid versions of these. These also, because they are connected to some big players that already exist, like your Google and your Microsoft, the ways that those can be used both as a added on feature to get more money out of the suite that they might already be using, and then the free versions of it are again that very much like all the other stuff that Google offers for free. Here's a great way of like getting a lot of data, which then further programs the AI tools, and a free service. So there's a bunch of those trade-offs, and then you also have like on the back end of like where these tools fit in with other apps that aren't going to develop their own AI, but will be paying OpenAI or Microsoft or Google for an AI that can like amplify its already existing application.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so there we go. All right, so let's do a little true and false here. Generative AI, generative artificial intelligence may be becoming sentient. Raise your hands if you think that's true. Good. We got good skeptics in here, right? That's definitely not true. And I have to bring this up because, of course, one of the things that we're seeing within all of us, and I have no doubt almost everybody in this room has made this at some point. We are the product of millennia of stories about inanimate objects coming to life. Whether it's Pinocchio, there's Greek myths, there's all sorts of stories about inanimate objects coming to life. And so that's already like in our cultural mythos. But then, of course, over the last 2 years, you have a bunch of people who have been going on to, it's been in New York Times, different, I think it was 60 Minutes, where like people are like, there's life in the machine. Or they'll say, there's the ghost in the machine, that like there's clear signs of sentience. I want to dissuade us from that for lots of different reasons because I don't think it's helpful. I don't think we all agree on so many aspects of what we even mean by intelligence or artificial intelligence. And I mean, we can look at this country and know we don't all understand or have a clear appreciation of what life is. So I want to just kind of raise that up. I also want to bring it up because I think one of the things we want to keep in mind of is with all of our technology, we can very easily slip into anthropomorphizing it. And there's actually a name for this. It's the ELIZA effect. Anybody ever hear of the ELIZA effect? Okay, so back in like the 60s, they had this computer. They had this computer program that was pretty well at taking language, directed it at it, and turning it back to the person that put in that text, turning it into a question. And they named this program ELIZA. And there's lots and lots of folks who, in the 60s, who were like playing with this and swore to God that ELIZA was real, right? That just like the program was set up in such a way that when the text came in, it just pulled keywords, or it would just, turn around and ask simple exploratory questions like why? Why do you feel that way? Why does that make you angry, right? This is something we do all the time. In fact, I have seen people start to call ChatGPT with pronouns. Not they, them, but he. Typically he, very often he. Which is very interesting, since a lot of our previously AI tools were voice automated, and we typically name them she. So and they were typically things we told to do things versus things we actually tried to seek information from. So there's all sorts of, like, when we talk about biases and elements around AI, there's lots of loaded, interesting questions there. But I say all of this because we will continually slip into this language of humanizing this tool. And that's where it gets slippery for us. That's where it gets complicated in ways that probably aren't going to be useful for us. All right, what about this one? Generative AI is similar to human thinking when it arrives at an answer. How many people think that's true?
Yeah, I'll throw it up.
No? All right, we've got one. Any other takers? All right, so folks are starting to figure these things out and be aware of it. This is that should be crossed out. That should be it is false, right? Generative AI doesn't think like humans because, first of all, humans don't all think alike, right? This is why we talk about neurodiversity. This is why we talk about some of us have an internal speaker in our heads and other people don't. Some people can fully visualize an apple in their heads and other people can't, right? So that's the first thing, is like, we can't really say it thinks like a human because we don't have a singular unified way of how humans think. The other piece is that our minds are largely composed of whole things. And what I mean by that is, like, you think about, when you're thinking even in words, you're not thinking about the letters. You're thinking about the words. Like if I say apple, only now because I'm saying the word apple and talking about the letters, do you think about the letters? But if I said apple otherwise, you're likely thinking about that whole object. This is very different from how we think about, or how AI thinks, right? One of the ways I've heard best describe what AI does is it maths the hell out of things, right? That is the technical term. That is what happens with generative AI. And there's a lot of text on this. Don't worry, some of it I'm going to say, some of it is on the slides that you have access to. But what happens with generative AI is you're working with this thing called a large language model, a vast database of text. What generative AI tool has done is really mathematically looked at, examined along numerous axes the relationships, not just of the words, but of what it calls tokens. And tokens aren't full words. Tokens are like 4 to 5 characters. So it wouldn't necessarily, if it was looking at the word together, it might only be looking at the words T-O-G-E-T, right? So it's mathematically calculating and looking at relationships among these small bits of words. And then it is predicting, based on that, the model of that large language model and what it's mapped out, with what the input is. So it's saying, okay, this person just put in this prompt, right, this input. If I look at that and look at the mathematical relationships across these words, and then I look at the large language model, what makes most sense to pull out? And when it does that, it's not thinking, right? It's not thinking in that it has a sense of what it's saying. It's actually just kind of like playing matchmaker with words and formulas. And again, I'll hammer this again because I think for us, and as I'll talk about a little bit later, like for us that makes total sense, but that's not always the case for your everyday user. And so as we get to talking with students about it, thinking about it, that can open up some really tricky misunderstandings about what they're seeing. All right, true or false? Generative artificial intelligence can lie. Raise your hand if you think it's true. All right, everybody raising your hand, you fell for the trap. You fell for the trap.
You
it can produce falsehoods, but lying is intentional. Lying is a human feature, right? This is where it gets tricky, right? Even what do we typically call those lies? Anybody? Hallucinations, right? So when I talk about like our ability to be tricked about what it is, we often slip into it. And I like to focus on this because part of the way we can help students understand this more is by helping them understand it as a tool. It's very easy to slip into giving it more power than what we already assume it has. So just kind of keeping that in mind is that, like, you know, it can give you false information all the day long. But when you hear about it lying or hallucinating, it's just you want to make that distinction. So yes, absolutely, it will tell falsehoods till the cows come home, but it won't necessarily lie in the ways that we think it will. All right, here's another fun one. Artificial intelligence will take all of our jobs. Ooh, very strong crowd of absolutely not. I largely agree. I do think, though, there's two things that I see here for us to be thinking about and also thinking about with our students. One is just that idea that, no, it won't replace all our jobs, but we're gonna have to fight like hell to get it from unnecessarily replacing jobs, right? Because again, we live in a modern capitalist society that will often look for, you know, money over people. And because of that, wherever it's possible to replace machines with humans, companies and leadership will look to do that. And so this is one of the things we really have to think about because that's real. Like, we do see it happen. Now, we know historically every time a new technology arrives, new types of jobs pop up, for sure. But we also know that, like, there's that while those new jobs pop up, there's often an introduction of de-skilling and therefore devaluing, which is also why we look at it and see ourselves in the socioeconomic, like, spreading or emptying out of the middle class. So we have to kind of think about that. And then the other piece we want to think about this is it won't necessarily take our jobs, but it's gonna create even more cognitive demand on us. So it might not be directly, you know, taking out a faculty role, but it might be like, well, now that you have AI as your sidekick, as your co-pilot, now you can teach, you know, if your course was 40 students, it can now be 50, right? If you are doing a report that's due quarterly, and a report can stand in for any type of, like, significant cognitive work. If you're doing that quarterly, now it's going to be due weekly. And it still requires, even if you're using generative AI, a lot of cognitive work, and, you know, that you're going to do that each week, and it's going to take more out of you. Meanwhile, that will be fed into an AI that will be then turned into bullet points for whoever wants to read that report, because who's reading all these reports? We're just making them. But this is a thing we want to think about, is like, it won't take all our jobs, but it is going to change the ways we work. It's going to change the loads that we're being asked, and what jobs become less valuable, and what jobs, you know, feel like they're just cranking people through. All right, generative AI intelligence only has information since 2022. Okay, raise your hands if you think it's true. No? All right, people have been paying attention, right? So we do know with this, and this will depend on the AI that you use, that what their large language model is based upon may be older or newer. And there's also newer tools and practices, and this is where a tool like Perplexity comes into mind, where it actually also uses the internet as part of its creation of its answer. There's a tactic you may have heard called RAG, and I'm gonna completely blank on what that stands for as an acronym, but basically what RAG does with large language models is you put in your prompt, the AI will look at its large language model, kind of come up with here's what I think the answer is, and then at the same time do an internet search to see if anything significant has changed and compare the two, and then try to come up with the most accurate answer. So we do see more and more that these are available currently. One of the things that early on people were feeling more comfortable with was like, yeah, but it's 2 years old data, and now that's something that's also changing. So what about this one? Here's a fun one. AI detectors can determine if something was created with generative AI. Raise your hand if you think that's true. God, y'all look good. You're on top of this. It can. First of all, whenever you're dealing with AI detectors, you're not dealing with certainty, you're dealing with probability. You're dealing, because you can't really have certainty in that whatever you're asking of that particular AI tool does not have access to whatever was created with something else, with some other AI tool. That's the first challenge. The other challenge is, it's again giving the machine more power than what it has. It's creating a probability. It's saying the pattern of this language does look like something that would be created by AI. The problem is, one of the things AI will be looking for is kind of a very steady, sturdy pattern of like repetition. Anybody know who uses a steady pattern of writing?
High school students.
High school students. People learning a new language. So one of the things we've seen with a lot of the research around using AI detectors is it's going to increase the level of false negatives towards people who are learning English. Because how do you learn a language? You learn it through pattern. And so if you start to write in a pattern, you're going to get dinged. And this is the thing that, given where I work at an institution, I wouldn't say keeps me up at night, but like just definitely gets to me is you are a student learning, like working through a language that you're still grappling around at an institution that may be, may not have the best record on working with students who are English language learners, and an instructor comes up to you and says, you used AI. How do you defend yourself? How do you defend yourself? So I think this is one of the things, and it's going to be hard for us, but it is a reality of we have to walk carefully around how we have conversations about the usage of these tools and how much we depend on other technology to save us. I think the road of AI detectors is something that I often think of as like, we're just going to keep trying to build mousetraps, and our students are smart and resourceful. And sometimes the ones that are doing it in the most obvious ways are the ones that need help. The ones that are doing it because they don't want to do the work and are just like really resourceful and creative, you got to give them that. You're never going to know that they've used it. So like just kind of keeping that tension in mind. All right, so I've talked a little bit here. I've been playing back and forth a little bit, but I'm just kind of curious, like, where are people's feelings about AI? How are people feeling about it? Feel free to be blunt, be honest. You don't have to worry. I don't have emotions. I'm a large language model. No, just kidding.
I feel really lucky that it's existing now as opposed to when I was like a student, because I can't say that I would never use it. I'm currently in a graduate program, and so it's kind of, I've noticed the way that my graduate program has changed to in response to AI as opposed to just like general discussion boards. But I want to know a lot more about it so that I can empower myself and the students that I work with, but I sure am glad I did not have access to this in high school.
That's fair. I'm of two minds on that. I wish I had it during grad school, because I will tell you right now, I was supposed to read Michel Foucault in grad school. I tried really hard. It took me over 10 years to read his book, History of Sexuality. It's only 170 plus pages. The only reason I was able to end up reading it is because it came out in audio finally, and I could listen to it. But I would have this is where it's, as a tool, would be phenomenal, because I was not going to, in a grad class, be like, I don't understand this, when like 5 people are like, clearly they love Foucault. And I'm just like, that's great. I don't know what language I'm reading, and I'm thinking it's English. So I hear you. There's this double bind of like, what would be the right decisions? And it's challenging for sure. So yeah, I appreciate that of like, not an existential challenge for me in my education at this moment. Thank you. What else? Ooh.
Kind of similar to your sentiment. I'm more jealous that it came out when it did. While I was finishing my dissertation, I wish that ChatGPT had a plug-in into NVivo as a quantitative researcher, right? Like coding, how long that takes to code. It would have been great to, either way, you're still going to formulate your own code, but to have something to go through hundreds of pages of transcriptions and help you identify some of those major codes, I think that would have been awesome to do.
I feel you. I just finished chapter 4 in my dissertation, which is also qualitative. So I couldn't really make it work, and I wasn't going to because it started, I was already deep into it. But I feel you. Like, yeah, the ways it could have helped us. Other thoughts or feels about AI?
Get my steps in.
Right? Yeah, just
Yeah, Larry, the big concern is in Washington, D.C., there's some misconceptions going on about AI by politicians that really don't understand it. Okay, so there's a fear coming out. And then the media is amplifying that too. All right, so the point is that, how can you make a good opinion on it if you really don't understand it?
Isn't that what they get paid to do? No. Right. Like, I think to your point, the larger discourse is exhausting. It's been exhausting on so many different things, and the AI discussion has only amplified it. And we know as we move into an election season, like, there's going to be even more challenges and concerns about it. So, like, I absolutely agree that challenge, that exhaustion, just like when you hear people talking about things, I flashback to 5 years ago when you had senators around social media, like, again, not even knowing what the tool is that they're talking about, but wanting to get that soundbite. So one of the things, like, I will tell you for myself, I am all over the place. I will have 15 different thoughts and feels about generative AI just on the drive here today. I mean, it was an 1.5-hour drive, but still, like, that is my typical Thursday. It's complicated. There's a lot of things that are uncertain. There's a lot of things that are challenging. And I think that's something I really want to, I want us to just kind of be able to name and sit with, especially as educators, just coming out of when we're acknowledging the pandemic, and actually taking steps to, like, be safe and feeling like, oh, I might have whatever we want to call a normal classroom. It was like we're just finishing that semester, and then all of a sudden it was just like, oh, here's this new thing to upend us. Here's this new thing to change things about. And so I'd just like to acknowledge, like, this is a challenge. I'm gonna, just for the sake of time, move to 3 considerations that, as we get into the workshops and as we get through to today, to be thinking about, and to really consider, what does this mean for your teaching and learning? What does this mean for how you use these tools in relation to your work, both in the classroom and from out? The first is just that we need what I call 2 buckets. There's really just, like, one definitive fact that we know about AI for the foreseeable future, and that is it calculates the probability of responses, but it doesn't know the answers, right? So it is always calculating, this is what I think the answer should be, but it can't categorically state this is the answer. So in order for us to use AI well, like really well, we actually need 2 buckets. One bucket is an actual working understanding of what generative AI is, right? A sense of how it works, how it calculates its answers, its biases, how it fits into the larger cultural landscape, particularly how that is all fueled by lots of different motivations. Often, as was mentioned earlier, profit motivations. So we have to keep that in our head and have, like, really understand what it is, what it isn't, what it can and can't do. But the second bucket, and this is where with students, it's really hard for them to understand, is that the second bucket is actually deep knowledge of the subject matter, right? We need to be able to know how, like, whether it is actually true or accurate. A colleague of mine, she's a phenomenal person to follow on social media. She has a blog. She's been doing a lot of this work around AI as well. Her name is Maha Bali. And she said this really brilliant quote when I was on a panel with her a couple weeks ago. where she said, she's like, if they were wrong, meaning the generative AI tools, if they were wrong 50% of the time, we wouldn't have a problem. I mean, something that's wrong 50% of the time, like, we are going to be always skeptical. But AI can be wrong or biased or whatever, like 1% of the time. And that makes it more dangerous because we're more willing to just kind of trust. We're more likely to miss the ways that it shows, like certain things show up that are wrong or inaccurate or what have you. And so that's the other thing we have to realize is that, like, yes, it can put facts out there, but it can't produce knowledge. It can't assess knowledge in a way that, like, gives up our control. And that is the thing we have to really work with and think with students. I mean, avoidance isn't a strategy. I like to say abstinence has never been a great strategy. It didn't work in prohibition. It didn't work in the war on drugs. It didn't work with abstinence-only sex education. It's not going to work with AI. That doesn't mean we have to be all in on AI, but like we have to think about it in our classes. We have to move beyond the like banning it or dismissing it. I see a lot of folks that will dismiss it, and I think that itself doesn't help because if people are finding use for it, they're going to use it. So if students are finding use for it, like it doesn't help to say, oh, that tool is dumb, it's stupid, it doesn't work. If it works for the student, they're going to want to work with it. It's our job to help them think about, well, what does that mean and how does that work? So this doesn't mean you can't have guardrails. It just means you should have clarity about how and why you arrive at those guardrails. Why it's important for your discipline to use it in the ways that you're expecting them to use it and not use it. And then the last, and I've already hit upon this a few times, is just no single one of us figures it out. Like we collectively figure this out. And this is hard for us in academia because so much of our work is individual, right? We get, an individual gets hired, an individual gets tenure, an individual gets promotion. But so much of this work is about really figuring it out across different areas. A lot of us needing to form our communities of practice, to share, and talk about what we're doing in class, because that's also a thing that's hard, is there can be a lot of vulnerability or hesitation to share how you're approaching it, how you're doing it, or what you've done. One of the things I did when all of this started, because I thought it was important, is something I always did, which was back in January, I was like, what is my policy for my class? All right, I'm gonna write that up, and then I'm gonna start to share it. And I'm gonna share it in a crowdsourcing document. And soon other people started to add theirs. And very quickly, I mean, now there's about 120, 25 policies from across the world of how people are dealing or thinking about or contextualizing the use of the tool. But that only happens when we share, that only happens when we're willing to like put down our guardrail a little bit and like talk to one another about like, what are you grappling with? Like, what haven't you figured out? Because I can tell you there's plenty I haven't figured out, and I'm always asking other folks to figure it out. So I just kind of wanted to leave that with folks, so as we get into today, remember some of the things we're going to be doing are going to be in communication, interaction with one another, and wanting to make sure folks are actually doing that and feeling comfortable with that.